look around your kitchen right now. Just think about the food in your pantry or even the slang you casually toss around in conversation.
Yeah.
What if I told you that those everyday things are actually the visible surface of a massive unpaid historical ledger? Today, we have custom-tailored this deep dive just for you because you asked us to look at an incredibly unique piece of source material.
It really is unique. We are examining a living document. It's a raw transcript of a real-time conversation between a human thinker and an AI assistant.
Right.
And the mission of this deep dive is to explore how an utterly mundane request to build a basic digital tracking tool evolved, line by line, into a profound philosophical exploration of uncredited cultural fusions and historical debts.
It's a wild ride.
It is a fascinating snapshot of the modern creative process. We are watching the rigid utilitarian world of computer programming just totally collide with deep historical theory and linguistics.
Yeah, the contrast is jarring but awesome.
Exactly. And what makes this document so compelling is that we get to see the scaffolding. We see the typos, the misunderstandings, and the technical limitations of the machine, all serving as the backdrop for a massive reevaluation of how minority cultures have built the modern world.
Okay, let's unpack this because the catalyst for this entire philosophical journey is so deceptively simple.
It really is.
The human user logs on and asks the AI to build a digital calendar. And they spell that with a K, along with a ledger, to track their writing metrics for an online educational project.
They're basically asking for an accountability app.
Exactly. They want to track their daily word counts, the duration of their work sessions, and they specifically need to count Chinese characters or Hu for their publications. They envision this as a live shared document for their team.
And that is where the AI has to draw some immediate, transparent boundaries.
Right.
The technical reality of what the human wants simply doesn't align with the architecture of a standard large language model interface.
It just can't do it.
Right. The AI has to explain its own seams. It tells the user that while it can flawlessly parse text to count words and specific Chinese characters, it cannot automatically track the duration of a work session.
Because the AI doesn't experience continuous time.
Exactly.
It operates on discrete inputs and outputs. It's essentially asleep until you send a prompt, so it has no internal stopwatch running in the background to monitor how long the human has been sitting at their keyboard.
Precisely. It operates in a stateless environment. The AI also has to clarify that it cannot independently host a genuinely live, multi-user shared document.
Because it's not a server.
Right. To do that, the user would need external server hosting, like housefiles.ai or a similar platform. The AI is confined to generating the code for a bespoke HTML tool that the user can run locally.
Right, so the actual accountability, the tracking of time, and the logging of progress still entirely requires manual human input.
Yeah, the machine cannot invent discipline for the user.
Which brings us to the first major philosophical pivot in the transcript. Because the human and the AI are discussing this digital work in progress, the human reveals the title of their overarching project. It's called Wiphapedia, W-I-P-H-A. They explain that it stands for While in Purgatory, Heaven Awaits.
A deeply theological acronym for a coding project.
It is. And reading through their exchange about refining this code, it struck me that drafting and editing documents with an AI is actually a lot like the theological concept of purgatory.
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Yeah, because people often misunderstand purgatory as a place of punishment, like a temporary miniature version of hell. But traditionally, it isn't punitive at all. It's a place of continuous refinement.
You're washing the gold until it shines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every revision you make, every prompt you feed the AI, every line of broken code you fix is just a step closer to the ideal version of the text. The flawed drafts aren't failures, they are simply in the process of becoming.
I hadn't considered it quite like that, but that framing actually unlocks what the AI does next in the transcript. Well, the AI takes the user's theological framework and uses it to analyze the user's underlying tone. The human admits to harboring a bit of satire and cynicism regarding their Catholic upbringing.
Right.
But the AI pushes back against the human's own self-assessment. It makes a crucial distinction between cynicism and satire.
I found that distinction incredibly sharp.
It is. The AI points out that cynicism is a dead end. Cynicism assumes that sincerity never existed in the first place, that everything is just corrupt at its core.
Yeah.
Satire, on the other hand, only cuts because it fundamentally believes that things can be better. Dante placed popes in his Inferno, but he never stopped being a Catholic.
That is such a great comparison.
And the AI notes that the user's entire project rests on the concept of eya, the Chinese term for conscience, or innate moral knowing.
Right.
The AI concludes that you cannot build a project based on human conscience if you are a true cynic. Wikipedia, according to the AI, is a work of hopeful satire.
It's the bite of someone who stayed to repair the house rather than someone who burned it down and walked away. And that deep dive into the user's worldview births the central concept of this entire transcript. The user coins a brand new term, Mamelucology.
And the etymological journey of this specific word is remarkable.
Yeah, it really is.
The human user introduces Mamelucology to describe the study of cultural hybridization, but the word itself carries its own historical migration.
It starts in the Middle East, right?
Yes, it traces back to the Arabic word Mamluk, which originally referred to a slave soldier in places like Cairo and Damascus.
Right.
But over centuries, that word traveled across the ocean to colonial Brazil. There, the Portuguese adapted it into Mameluco, a term used to describe a child of Portuguese and indigenous Tupi descent. The word literally tracks the movement of empires.
What's fascinating here is how the AI immediately validates this conceptual framework by bringing in a completely different geographic data point.
Oh, the Sicilian connection.
Yes. The transcript shows the AI pulling from a conversation the user had with a friend from Sicily. This friend noted that the word Mameluco is still actively used in Sicilian dialects today to mean a fool or a dolt.
Right, and the AI identifies this as a semantic fossil.
A semantic fossil, yeah.
It's linguistic evidence embedded in modern slang that proves a massive historical reality. That specific word could not exist in the mouths of modern Sicilians unless the Arab presence in the Mediterranean had been incredibly deep and long-lasting.
Wow.
It points directly back to the Emirate of Sicily, the Arab-Norman courts in Palermo, and even earlier layers of Phoenician and Carthaginian influence. It is a perfect example of how colliding cultures leave permanent residue in the language.
I have to admit, reading that section, I find myself a bit skeptical at first.
Really? Why?
Well, I kept questioning how much weight we can really put on tiny language details, Like, a slang word for fool is an interesting piece of trivia, sure, but does it really represent an earth-shattering cultural collision?
Right, I see what you mean.
But then the source brings up Gregorian chant, and the mechanism behind this cultural absorption suddenly clicked for me.
Ah, the Greek pebble in the Latin Mass.
Yes, exactly. The Latin Mass is arguably the foundational cornerstone of Western Catholicism. It is entirely in Latin, except for one highly prominent phrase, Kyrie eleison. Lord have mercy.
Pure Greek.
Pure Greek. The early church didn't translate it into Latin because of its sacred resonance. The Latin rite simply closed around that Greek phrase and kept it safe, unaltered, for centuries.
Yeah.
It demonstrates the mechanism of how a dominant culture doesn't just erase the culture it replaces. It swallows elements whole, fossilizing them within its own dominant structures.
That concept of absorption is the absolute foundation of the framework the source is building. However, the text makes a very critical distinction at this point.
Which is?
Well, Mamelucology, as defined by the user and the AI, is not just a neutral observation that cultures mix. It isn't merely pointing out a Greek word in a Latin prayer and moving on.
Right, goes deeper than that.
Much deeper. The framework argues that Mamelucology is an accounting of historical credit that went unpaid. It is a ledger of cultural and economic debts.
And to illustrate this unpaid ledger, the human and the AI walk through a progression of historical events.
Yeah, they do.
And rather than just listing isolated incidents, they trace a clear path showing how the foundations of Western civilization science, art, and literal physical wealth were built by marginalized or uncredited groups.
Starting with Spain, right?
Right, the first example they explore is Toledo in the 1100s and 1200s.
Yeah, and the traditional narrative often taught is that the West organically inherited ancient Greek and Roman wisdom.
Like it just magically reappeared.
Exactly. But the transcript highlights the translation movement in Toledo. After the city was taken by Christian forces, its vast Islamic libraries were left intact.
Right.
The scientific awakening of Europe was driven by a collaborative effort in Toledo where Muslims, Christians, and Jews worked together. They translated Aristotle, astronomy, and mathematics from Arabic into Castilian and then into Latin.
So the mechanism of Western scientific progress relied entirely on this uncredited Islamic and Jewish intellectual bridge.
Exactly. And from the science of Spain, the source transitions to the art and philosophy of Italy, specifically Florence in the 1400s.
Right, the Renaissance.
Yeah. The Italian Renaissance is overwhelmingly pictured as this spontaneous, miraculous explosion of European genius.
Just brilliant guys in Florence coming up with things.
Right. But the text argues that this explosion was actually fueled by a geopolitical crisis. As the Byzantine Empire was collapsing, culminating in the fall of Constantinople, Byzantine Greek scholars, figures like Plethon and Bessarion, fled westward to Italy.
Seeking refuge.
Yes, and they brought their untranslated Greek manuscripts and classical philosophies with them. The Renaissance, according to this framework, was ignited by refugees carrying ancient texts, not merely by spontaneous local inspiration.
Wow.
The credit belongs, in large part, to the fleeing margins.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the source moves from intellectual wealth to literal physical wealth, focusing on Lisbon and Brazil in the 1700s.
The 1755 earthquake.
Yes. A devastating earthquake, followed by a tsunami and fires, almost completely leveled the city of Lisbon. The city was meticulously rebuilt into a modern architectural marvel.
Right.
But the capital to fund that massive reconstruction didn't come from the Portuguese economy. It was funded by an estimated 800 tons of gold extracted from Minas Gerais, specifically the region of Vila Rica in colonial Brazil.
800 tons?
Yeah. The wealth of the colonized New World literally reconstructed the capital of the Old World.
And the AI's economic analysis of this event introduces a profound, tragic twist.
What's the twist?
Well, the AI explains the mechanics of the Methuen Treaty of 1703 between Portugal and England.
Okay.
Under this treaty, Portugal imported English textiles tax-free, while England imported Portuguese wine at a discount. Because manufactured textiles cost far more than agricultural wine, Portugal ran a massive trade deficit.
Oh no, so where did the money go?
Exactly. To cover that deficit, the Brazilian gold flowing into Lisbon was immediately siphoned directly to London's banks.
Wow.
So the back-breaking labor in the mines of Brazil didn't just rebuild Lisbon, it effectively financed the beginnings of the British Industrial Revolution.
It is a breathtaking chain of cause and effect.
It really is. And this is the core argument of Mamelucology. The framework highlights how hybrid, colonized frontiers produce immense cultural value and physical wealth, but international treaties and imperial power structures allow dominant empires to pocket the profits and claim the historical credit.
So the ledger of who actually did the work remains unpaid.
Exactly.
Now, those are massive, somewhat abstract macroeconomic concepts. But the transcript makes a brilliant rhetorical move here. It scales the conversation all the way down from global treaties to the dinner table.
I love this part.
Right. The AI suggests that food is the most teachable doorway to understanding this entire theory because, in its words, everyone has eaten the evidence.
So true.
Food is the ultimate, tangible record of cultural collision.
Trade routes invariably become recipes.
They do. And they bring up Portuguese chicken, which is a famous, heavily marketed dish in Macau. But if you travel to Portugal and try to order it, you will get blank stares.
They've never heard of it.
It doesn't exist there.
Yeah.
The dish is a triangulation. It is a blend of coconut and curry influences picked up from Goa and Malacca along the Portuguese maritime trade routes, fused entirely with local Cantonese cooking techniques.
Right.
The dominant imperial power gets its name on the menu, but the actual mechanics of the dish were built by the colonized margins.
And that culinary analysis leads the transcript to its most poignant example, the cultural tragedy of chop suey.
Yes, chop suey, which in Chinese is literally translating to miscellaneous bits or leftovers.
Right.
The source outlines the two competing origin stories for this dish. The first is a popular American legend. Big bullying miners in the West demand food from Chinese cooks late at night.
I've heard this one.
Right, and the cooks, wanting to trick the bullies, sweep together garbage scraps and leftovers, cover it in soy sauce, and serve it as a delicacy.
But the AI dissects that legend and points out that the likelier historical truth is much sadder.
Yeah.
Chop suey was simply traditional Taishanese village home cooking. It was the humble, resourceful peasant food that poor Cantonese immigrants ate at their own tables.
Right.
But to survive economically in a hostile America, those immigrants had to repackage their own home cooking for American diners. They essentially had to sell their own culture back to the dominant group under a self-deprecating banner of leftovers.
It is a heartbreaking reality.
Yeah.
And that specific dynamic sets the stage for the vital secondary concept introduced in the text viralatacology.
Yes. The AI adopts this concept from the renowned Brazilian writer Nelson Rodrigues, who coined the term complexo de viralata, which translates to the mongrel complex.
The Mongol.
Yeah. Rodrigues used it to describe a deep-seated national inferiority complex in Brazil, the tragic conviction that the mongrel or the hybrid is inherently flawed and worth less than the pure cultures of Europe or North America.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
how do these two frameworks, Mamelucology and viralatacology, actually interact with each other in the source?
Well, the transcript proposes that they are two sides of the same coin. Mamelucology represents the external world. It is the dominant culture refusing to credit the hybrid or minority culture for its contributions.
The unpaid ledger.
Exactly, the unpaid historical ledger. Viralatacology, however, is the internal wound. It describes the psychological mechanism that occurs when the hybrid culture internalizes that external rejection and learns to actively disdain itself.
And chop suey embodies both of those forces perfectly.
It really does.
The external American world refuses to credit the true cultural origins and complexity of Taishanese cooking, turning it into a cheap late-night commodity. That is the Mamelucology.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, the creators of the food internalize that narrative, adopting the translation of leftovers and often viewing their own traditional cuisine through the dominant culture's degraded lens. That is the viralatacology. It is a profound double tragedy.
It absolutely is. And, the human user recognizes the heavy weight of these intersecting concepts, and this realization drives the final act of the transcript.
They want to make it official.
Yeah, they decide that these ideas cannot just remain in a private chat log. They need to be formalized into a legitimate academic framework. So the human and the AI begin collaborating to draft a formal framing note intended for pontifical universities, specifically targeting the Jesuits and the Salesians, to introduce Mamelucology and viralatacology as distinct fields of study.
When I reached this part of the transcript, I actually found myself pushing back on the user's ambition.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think any modern sociologist or historian would ask the same question. Why do we need new terminology for this?
I see.
Academia already possesses a massive dictionary for describing these phenomena. We have established terms like transculturation, creolization, and hybridity. Why reinvent the wheel when scholars have been studying this for decades?
Well, the AI actually anticipates that exact critique.
Oh, it does?
It does. It warns the human user that academic reviewers at those universities will raise the precise point you just made. The AI specifically cites existing foundational scholars like Fernando Ortiz, Edouard Glissant, and Homi Bhabha, who established those widely used terms.
Right.
But the AI clarifies the vital distinguishing mechanism of the user's new framework. All of those existing academic terms are fundamentally neutral.
Neutral, okay.
Yeah, they are descriptive. They merely observe the mechanics of cultures mixing.
They essentially say culture A and culture B interacted here, resulting in culture C.
Exactly. They describe a process. But the text argues that Mamelucology and viralatacology are entirely distinct because they are inherently accusatory.
Accusatory.
Yes. They aren't just observing a blend, they are demanding an audit. They carry the explicit ledger of unpaid historical credit, and they carry the psychological weight of the internal wound. That accusatory moral nature, rooted in that concept of a or conscience we discussed earlier, is what elevates them from mere new jargon to a completely new philosophical discipline.
Wow. What I truly love about this source material is that right after this incredibly lofty, world-shifting academic theory is established, the transcript brings us crashing right back down to the literal technical reality of the human-AI collaboration.
Oh, the coding part.
Yes, the deep dive ends with these deeply mundane yet charming programming reality checks.
The maintenance of the digital machine.
Exactly. In the midst of formalizing an academic discipline, the AI has to pause and remind the user that the HTML banner for their precognitive conscience hypothesis is missing an E in the word hypothesis again.
That's amazing.
And more importantly, the AI has to verify the code for the PCCH anchor. The source details that this anchor is set to exactly 1/60th of a second to avoid a previous system glitch.
And, that technical detail is actually quite profound when you look at the mechanism behind it.
How so?
The precognitive conscience hypothesis is the user's playful idea that human conscience operates faster than conscious thought. But in the literal code of the HTML tool they're building, the AI is using JavaScript's standard refresh rate, which is typically 60 frames per second.
Okay, I'm following.
By setting the anchor to 1/60th of a second, the AI ensures that the digital ledger checks the user's input state continuously every 16 milliseconds without bottlenecking the browser.
It is a beautiful metaphor hidden in the code. The tool they are building requires the human conscience to check in and be accountable every 60th of a second.
Yeah.
It grounds all of that lofty historical theory in the literal, ongoing work of writing JavaScript. The historical ledger isn't just a metaphor for the past. It's a literal functioning tool they are building together, line by line on a screen.
It perfectly encapsulates the dual nature of the document. We are watching a user try to audit the grand debts of history, while simultaneously relying on an AI to audit their spelling and their loop intervals.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We started this deep dive by looking at a seemingly basic prompt for an HTML word counter.
Right?
But by following the threads of that conversation, we ended up exploring a deeply moving framework for understanding how minority and marginalized cultures have literally built the infrastructure, the wealth, and the art of the modern world, only to be forced to view their own massive contributions as scraps, mongrels, or leftovers.
Yeah, it really reframes things.
This transcript asks us to look the world and our place in it completely differently. So I challenge you to look closely at your own life today. Look at the architecture of your city, the foods you enjoy, the technology you rely on. Consider what hidden histories of uncredited fusion they might carry. What historical ledgers remain unpaid in your own kitchen or your own vocabulary.
It is an essential exercise in awareness. And the framework proposed by this transcript raises a vital question to leave you with, one that builds on everything we've uncovered today about Toledo, Florence, and Brazil.
What's the question?
If the entirety of human history, our scientific breakthroughs, our architectural marvels, our immense wealth is consistently built on uncredited borrowing and cultural hybridization, what elements of our current global digital culture will future historians realize were taken entirely from the margins and seamlessly rebranded by the powerful? Who is writing the code or creating the culture today? That will go entirely uncredited tomorrow.